Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I am Anna Summers, and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar will be in April because next week's webinar is canceled. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from James Tanner, who will be giving a presentation on where are all the rest of the records on the FamilySearch website, an update. And then James has over 39 years experience in genealogical research and is an avid blogger of genealogies, Star Blog, and Rejoice and Be Exceeding Glad. He has served as a family history volunteer for 17 years and has presented at expos and conferences around the US, Canada, and Europe. He is a member of the board of directors of the Family History Guide Association and is currently serving at the BYU Family History Library. James is a professional photographer and has 7 children, 34 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. James, if you're ready, we'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, then I'll share my screen. If you need to stop, there you go. And we'll get going here. Okay, well, welcome to another BYU Family History Library webinar. Today we'll be talking about where are all the records on the FamilySearch website. And I guess I have one correction that I should have made to the introduction, as I now have 2 great-grandchildren, 1 boy and 1 girl. And we'll get right into this and get moving because it's going to take a little bit of explanation. First, we need to just kind of understand where all the billions of records on the FamilySearch website came from. They didn't just magically appear. They had to be acquired and they had to be cataloged and indexed and housed in the Family History Library in Salt Lake City and in other places now online. And it's just a massive undertaking. So the original paper records are things like the church genealogical records and other records that are now on the FamilySearch.org website. Simply were records that were accumulated. So there were records that, and many of those records were submitted by members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the form of family group records and pedigree charts and such as various members did their genealogical research. There are also copies and transcripts of records in other repositories. Sometimes when the records were not readily available, copies were made. There are many places where people did that as a matter of course. In other words, people who were doing research copied out all of the records of a particular area and turned them into books. And so there are books full of records that are transcriptions of records from different places around the world, including states in the United States and local records and all sorts of these kinds of records. So these are kind of the records that are there. There also in 1938, the church began microfilming records. And those records were distributed out on loan to all of the family history centers around the world as FamilySearch developed and got developing into FamilySearch as such and established family history centers. There are now over 5,000 family history centers around the world. Until September 8th, 2017, all of those records could be ordered and shipped out to the various family history centers around the world, and people would come to the family history centers specifically to look at the records on microfilm in microfilm viewers. So this was a major part of the process of accumulating records. And eventually they FamilySearch accumulated 2.4 million rolls of microfilm. And that was a tremendous amount of information on millions and millions of people. And then FamilySearch began to digitize copies of their original records from repositories. This started very kind of a tentative experiment to see whether it worked, and eventually became a full-blown process as part of the FamilySearch organization. And they have an acquisition department, and they send out representatives to all parts of the world to digitize records. Currently, there are over 300 cameras out there. We'll talk a little more about that in just a few minutes. Also, there were a lot of books and manuscripts and such that have been donated to the family history library over the years, and have become part of the collection online as a part of FamilySearch. So these books, so for example, let's suppose that you were very interested in your family and you had a prominent ancestor, or you had an ancestor that you thought was an important person in your family, and then decided to write a book about him and or her and all of their ancestors, or all their descendants. These are called surname books, kind of generically. And if you do a generic surname book, then I'll talk about that in a few minutes also. But at this point, I just kind of start the process thinking in your mind that you donate a copy of that book, or if you have a copy that you have the copyright to, then you can donate that to the Family History Library, and they will digitize the book and then put that book up online. So there's accumulation of these books, and also from other libraries that the digitization project has included books that were available from other libraries around the country and around the world. And there are many other kinds of records that don't fit into any of these categories. There's maps, and there's just accumulation of the kinds of things that you would get if you were out doing research and bringing all that information back into a repository like the Family History Library in Salt Lake City. So on September 1st of 2021, as I briefly mentioned, FamilySearch completed digitizing all of the 2.4 million rolls of microfilm. Now, the answer to that is, are now all of the records that were on the microfilm now available in digital format? The answer is not quite yet. The process of digitization proceeded much more rapidly than FamilySearch even anticipated, or anyone anticipated, because of the incremental changes in the technology of digitizing all of these rolls of microfilm. And at the end, the process was automated to the point almost that lots and lots of rolls could be completed every day. And so the process that was originally projected to take 30 years actually ended up taking about 6 or 7 years rather than 30 years. And so it was just an amazing process that all of these rolls of microfilm were digitized. But now comes the hard part. The hard part is going through all of those now digitized records and putting them in a format that can be admitted into the collections of the library in Salt Lake City and made available online for users to to access through the FamilySearch.org website. Now, there's another big problem here, and that is that when the original microfilms were filmed, many of those were acquired under certain specific contracts. And one of the contracts was that they would only be made available at the library or through the library. And so there's always been a percentage of those 2.4 million rolls of microfilm that were only available to be viewed in the library in Salt Lake City, regardless of the ones that could be sent out to the whole world. So those were kind of two different categories of records there. The problem when those records were digitized was that those contracts hadn't necessarily been updated to the point where the digital records can be viewed. So there are still records on the FamilySearch website in a number of different categories, ones that cannot yet be put on and freely made available online, except in the library in Salt Lake City, if there. And secondly, those that can be viewed in some format, but restricted to viewing within a family history center. And you may not ever run into a restricted record. You may never click on a record on FamilySearch and see a little key over the icon for a digital image that says that this is a restricted record and you can't see that record. But in some countries, that's seems like that's the common problem. And in countries that I deal with and helping people in Latin America, we run into restricted records constantly that people cannot view outside of a family history center. And then there was a double whammy that happened the last few years, and that was with the pandemic shutting down everything. That nobody really had access to those records outside of Salt Lake, and for a long time, of course, the Salt Lake Library was closed. So there's been times when even though we have this vast reservoir of digitized records, that they're still not completely available in the way that it would be most beneficial to all the researchers. And that's nothing we can do anything about other than what FamilySearch is doing is, in a sense, renegotiating the contracts and finding the original owners or people who can agree to having the records publicized completely on the internet. So that's one of the issues that's still happening. And I point out also that microfilmed records, the microfilms themselves are still, a large number of those are still available at the Salt Lake City Family History Library, the ones that are to be most used. So if you go to Salt Lake City, you can see the very large collection of microfilm that's still readily available. And if they're not available there, you can order a copy to come to the library, but that usually takes some time. So you may have to do that in advance. Now, the Brigham Young University Family History Library also has a significantly large collection of microfilm. And we continue to order microfilm from Salt Lake City. So if there's some real purpose in having to come and look at a microfilm image, then you've got, there's still this possibility of visiting the libraries and coming to that, having that happen. Now, until that happens, until all of those are cleared up, as you go through the FamilySearch catalog and look at the entries, you may very well find an entry, like I show here, where this record says that it's still on microfilm. And I just copied this off today, off of the FamilySearch catalog. So this particular film is only available still on microfilm ostensibly, but we assume that it's already been digitized and simply is in the process of either obtaining permission to be published or it's simply not been cataloged and recatalogued as a digital image. And that all takes time and a lot of work by various people to do that. So where did the digitized records come from? Okay, so that's the question. In addition to the 2.4 million rolls of microfilm being digitized, There are millions, billions of additional records that have been digitized directly from the records. In other words, once the cameras began operating and taking digital images of records, that was extended to the acquisition of all the records throughout the world. And so records are only coming to FamilySearch now in a digitized format. So all the records that are coming in now, which are coming in the millions of records per year, are being digitized and are already ready to go up online. And in fact, the time from when the records are actually photographed in the field and come to and make it their way to Salt Lake City, and which I'll explain, and then put online has condensed down to around 2 weeks right now. So it's about 2 weeks from the time the pictures were taken. And that's the question you're going to ask at this point is, okay, where are they? Now, the process here is that in order to do the digitization, FamilySearch has to go out, representatives from FamilySearch have to go out and actually contact the record repositories, the people that have these books on shelves and that have the records in their files and their cabinets and their archives and all of their different repositories in their boxes and their basements and on their shelves and wherever. And they have to make individual agreements with each of these organizations, these venues where the repositories where the records are kept, and they negotiate those. Now, how does that occur? Why would people do this? Well, the answer is that FamilySearch does the digitization for free. There is no charge to the repository for any of the records that are digitized. So assuming this particular repository, which happens to be a picture of the Maryland State Archives, if you were to, if they came into the Maryland State Archives, there would be a cost to the institution because they would have to have people in their organization who would pull the records, keep track of what had been digitized and what not been digitized, and would have to take care of all of their cataloging and movement and all of that sort of thing. And so there's some expense to the repository, but in some cases, and in all cases, there's no charge for the actual digitization. And when it's finished, or when those records are finally digitized, then the repository gets a copy of the entire digital collection. So they can do whatever they want to with their digital collection, and they can put it online, or they can use it as an archive copy, or whatever they want to do. And then they can make copies of that, obviously. So there's a great benefit to the repositories. And over the years that this has been happening, since microfilm started in 1938 up to the present time, when including the digitization efforts that are going on presently, we're talking about a lot of repositories that no longer exist and that records have been lost. And so the preservation that is on the FamilySearch website is phenomenal, because in a lot of, not in an overwhelming number of cases, but in a significant portion of those documents are simply no longer available. And because of the efforts of FamilySearch, a lot of these records are being preserved when they would never be available again to people. And also the advantage, of course, to the repository is that if they're made available on the FamilySearch website, then the repository doesn't have to host them. They can go out onto FamilySearch and look at their own records if they want to. And so that's another cost saving to the repository. Notwithstanding that, there are still some places where they will not agree to complete open viewing of their records online. And so they are, those are the ones that are in a sense restricted and kept to either to viewing at a family history center, or in some cases, viewing only at the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Utah. Okay, so this is kind of the first level of what happens with the records, and then they have the agreement process, and then there's a planning process that goes on with FamilySearch in determining priorities and which records they're most interested in. And there's some economies of scale that come into play here. Very small collections of records are presently not commercially possible to digitize because of the type of the problems. And FamilySearch has tried at different times to address the problem of smaller collections, like say the collections of a historical society that's a few thousand records or something. And so far that's still an issue, and there are still some issues about how those records are going to be ingested into the FamilySearch system of digital records. So there are some other organizations out there that are more than happy to support digital efforts and have done so in the past. And so if you have access to that kind of a small collection, you may want to take advantage of exploring the options for getting someone to come in and digitize those records. And sometimes there are individual genealogists who are more than willing to go in and digitize a set of records, and with the agreement that they will get them published or put online. And there are some private organizations. There's one very active private organization called Reclaim the Records. You can look that up. It's under Reclaim the Records online. And they're a nonprofit corporation that is devoted to getting records out of government repositories when there are restrictions for viewing those records that are contrary to the Freedom of Information Act that exist around the country from the national level down to state levels. And so those records are being made available. And a lot of those records, by the way, are going on another website that is a very, very important record repository website, and that's archive, archive.org, archive.org, not archives with an S or anything like that, just archive.org. It's the Internet Archive, and there are billions of records on there. And so you just, you've got to understand that there's lots of information that is being gathered even in other places digitally. Okay, so first of all, the records can come in all different kinds of ways. If you look over here on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a box full of probate records. This is the box of kind of records that my wife and I assisted in digitizing over a year in Annapolis at the Maryland State Archives, which is why I mentioned that earlier. And that's the way we got them. And then we had to organize them by year and by date and get them set up by date. They're just simply piled in boxes. And once they were then sorted out, they needed to be opened and flattened so they could be digitized. So this is what we ended up with, is a flat record that was able to be digitized by the camera. And then, as I mentioned, FamilySearch has over 300 camera teams digitizing new records. And this is a typical setup here. If you look at the top, there's a camera. It doesn't look much like a camera because it's an this one happens to be an industrial digitizing camera at about, I think they're around 50 megapixel cameras. And they were, very high resolution. They're set up to work remotely. They have a long life. They could take many hundreds of thousands of millions of images before they wear out, as all mechanical things do. And so there's kind of a shelf life on cameras. And then what you're looking at is how the records had to be flattened. Yes, we'd use little foam pads on the side to get the leveling and clamps to clamp down the pages. So even though we would think that it would be rather quickly to go through there and turn the pages and get the digital copies, the answer was no. It's really kind of a process, because you have to process through each page with the clamps and the levers as you go through the book and make your digital copies of the book. And this was an automatic process, and the little box on the left-hand side of the desk there is actually the switch that takes the picture. And so one thing you had to learn is to get your hands out of the picture. If you left a finger or a hand inside the picture, then that picture had to be done over. So if you sent off the microfilm to Salt Lake and to go through and found there were some fingers or hands sticking into the picture, then they would send the whole roll back to be done, and we'd have to redo the whole roll. So there was a kind of a good incentive to get your hands out of the way. And so we learned how to go put them right up against our chests and stop every time we took the picture. So there's really nothing else. There was a computer, obviously, that was there, and it was recording the images onto a hard disk, a hard drive. And then that hard drive was then sent to Salt Lake. So as in our case, weekly, we would change out our hard drives and send the one that was full for that week off to Salt Lake City, where those images would be downloaded from the hard drive, and then the hard drive would be shipped back to us. So we called it a shuttle because it went back and forth between Salt Lake and where we were in Annapolis. And they went by FedEx. They could go by UPS, FedEx, or any of the other delivery services. And I assume that some places they use the postal network to do that. But all of those come in from around the world, and they're then processed in Salt Lake centrally, and all the information is pulled off the hard drives. And then there's a process of reviewing each of the records, each of the rolls, each set of records that come through to make sure that things aren't like fingers and hands in the pictures, or if they're out of focus, or if they're skewed or something happens that for some reason the image is not good. And those images were retaken. And then we have, then the records are then further processed. So all of these records eventually end up somewhere on the FamilySearch website. And if you think about that, you may think, well, yeah, they are. And I look for them and they're there. And then I guess the real question, though, is where are all the records? Because you may be surprised to find out that there are a lot more records than you've ever assumed, and that they're in lots of different places that you didn't know about. So there are 3 different kinds of records on the FamilySearch website. It's important to understand that that these are completely different types of records in the sense of the way they're handled. Now they're going to be the same thing. In other words, you're going to have a probate record that's indexed, and it may be in the catalog, and then you may have one that's not indexed and not in the catalog, or you can have any other kinds of records. But from the category of records and their usability and availability to a user on the program, on the website, then these are really the 3 different kinds of records that exist. The first are indexed records. Now we think of indexed records when we think of indexing. It's a program that's ongoing with FamilySearch, that we have people who are out there volunteering to index the records, and those indexes are becoming more and more common. And in addition to that, over the years, for the last many years that I've been involved in and aware, some of the organizations, particularly at BYU and around the United States, have been working on a couple of different things. First of all was optical character recognition. And that's now almost universally used for almost all kinds of purposes, from financial institutions to libraries to putting out digital copies of the books. And so digital optical character recognition is now a kind of a settled and well-established technology. But what has been the problem all along is handwriting recognition, because optical character recognition recognizes characters, meaning printed characters like alphabet characters. And handwriting recognition recognizes all the rest of the records. And as genealogists, it's inevitable the first time you open a record, it's all in handwriting and all in script. And so you're going to be basically dealing with trying to read the script. And that's a challenge for a lot of genealogists are overwhelmingly challenged by this. And I think the younger people who are not getting the benefit of having to learn how to do script handwriting in school, many of whom do not have classes anymore in doing in their handwriting, they learn how to print, but they don't learn how to do cursive. And because they don't know how to do cursive, they can't read cursive. And it makes it even more difficult. So there's always been a concern among the larger genealogical community about the lack of cursive training for younger people, because that would make a huge, almost every record before 1870 unavailable to someone who had no ability to read cursive. And that means that there's some of the people who go into genealogical research have to spend a considerable part of their original learning process learning how to read cursive. And that may be the same problem for anyone, particularly if they have to move to a different language. Like learning to read cursive in Old German script is a lot different than learning it in Old English script. Because you can often recognize the words, but if you don't know the words, then you have a harder time reading the script, even if it is something that's recognizable. Okay, well, that brought us to the present. And now over the past few years, there have been major advances in handwriting recognition. And now using artificial intelligence and the high-powered computers that we have today, we are able to read handwriting at a very high level of accuracy, approaching over 90%. And what has happened recently from FamilySearch is that the indexing that's been done by hand is now being done by artificial intelligence. And there's a new program with FamilySearch called Get Involved. That's part of, if you look for FamilySearch/Get Involved, there's lots of ways to get involved. One of those is to begin checking the handwriting recognition programs to make sure that that's parts of them that could not be read are read correctly. And so this may be the shift in indexing over the next couple of years. Indexing will never go away, because even though there's artificial intelligence and handwriting recognition, there are going to be some records that are only going to be able to be indexed by hand, by individuals. And so what we're getting into, though, is that the vast majority of the records out there are going to be done by artificial intelligence. And in fact, FamilySearch and Ancestry announced a program for the 1950 census where Ancestry has developed handwriting recognition and will use that to index the 1950 census. And then they're asking for volunteers to go in and check that against and look at the entries to make sure they're correct. So with a double check, so forth. And I can tell you right now, because I've been involved a little bit in that, is doing that is much faster and much easier than doing indexing. And so you already have an idea of what the computer thinks, and then you read it. And if you can't read it, then neither you or another computer can read it. It may just be unreadable. Okay, but now, so we have indexed records, and how many of the records on the website are indexed? I'll get to that in just a minute. Then we obviously have a number of records in the catalog. So we have the FamilySearch catalog, and it has millions and billions of records in there. And you can go in there and click and see the records in the catalog. But now we have a third set of records. Those are records that are not indexed and they're not in the catalog. And so where are those records and how do we get to those records? So that's kind of the core of what I wanted to talk about today. So first of all, we'll start with the indexed records, the historical record collections. And there's 3,130 collections as of whenever, March of 2020, around March of 2021, I think is when I did this. And those records are indexed to some extent. And in order to understand that, you have to understand what this number means. When it says records, that is the number of indexed records. So that over there that says title, then the record number, that record number that you see in historical record collections is the number of indexed records. And when it says browse images, that means that none of those images are indexed. Okay, so there's still a few browse images in the historical record collections, but for quite a while now, for the last couple of years, at least or more, FamilySearch has been adding only indexed records to the historical record collections. So the question is what does that mean when I say that some of them are unindexed, that they have unindexed images? Well, if we look at a record, we look at this. First of all, only about 20% of all the records on the FamilySearch record website are indexed. That's the most recent number that I've gotten. My number, actually, my guess before I learned that number was a little bit higher. So this is a little kind of more realistically. And actually that number is going down rather than going up. And it will only start going up when the artificial intelligence and handwriting recognition get to be taking on the major part of the indexing process because of the number of records that are being added to the FamilySearch website every minute, every day, all day long, and every year. Okay, so now we're going to look at these record numbers. So if we look down here at the Brazil Santa Catarina civil registration, 1850 to 1999, it says 497,233 records. But if we look at that record set, we find out that there are about 1.3 million records in this collection. But this number is this number in here, the 497 record, is the number of indexed records. So if you did a name search in that particular collection, you would only be searching about a third or so of the records, maybe a little less than half of the records in that particular collection. So here's the actual record. If you look at that and click on and look at the record, this is the way it comes up now. There's been some changes. You can see that it says browse all 1,038,133 images. So assuming that each image has one record, then we are talking about a tremendous amount of records that are unindexed, that are still in this collection, even though it appears, and you can search by name. So you're only searching a very small portion of this record collection when you do your name search. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to go browse the images. And if this is a civil registration record, it may be one record per page, but I've seen civil registration records that had 4 records per page, or even 6 or 8 records per page. So it's just the number of images is still not a count of the number of actual records that are involved. So we just need to be aware that there's not a connection between this number in the historical record collections and the actual number of images. The number of records in the historical record collection may actually be greater than the total number of images. So that's possible. Okay. So there's the total number of images. Okay, so you will not find unindexed records with a name search. And I just have to say that over again. So in this record is the example, is you're missing a whole lot of records that you need to look at individually rather than rely on a name search. Your person may not be included they may be in the records, but not included in those set of records that have been indexed. Okay, so now they catalog the records. And what is a catalog? The catalog is a listing by location primarily, and from the standpoint of genealogy. So they organize the records by location. So you look by a place and you work your way down to those records that are associated with those particular places around the world. So once they're in the catalog, then they're discoverable in the sense that I can go in the catalog, find the place, and see that set of records. Now, what I have to do when I look at the records is that I have to search those unindexed records page by page. And obviously, this is one of the major kind of activities that people are involved in when they're doing genealogy, is searching records page by page. And I might mention on the side that, of course, there are some of us who don't trust indexes and look for the records ourselves anyway, as we always want to view the original record. We do not rely on the indexed record for our major information, unless that's the only record. In other words, there are records that consist of an index, and so that's it, and that's all you can rely on. So, but otherwise, if at all available, we would like to see the original record to see, one, if the name's been transcribed correctly, and two, to see whether any other information is available on the record that might be of assistance. So we do end up going page by page through records all the time. This is just a constant thing that happens. And when it was with microfilm, it was very time consuming and extremely physically difficult, because you had to sit there for hours staring at the microfilm. With digital images, at least it's you can do it at home for the most part. And there are a lot of, and there's ways to magnify and make the images more visible. And so it's really a lot easier with digital images. Okay, but less than half of the digital images on the FamilySearch website are cataloged or indexed. Now think about that for just a second. So, and my estimate is around 40%. Only about 40% of all the records there are so far on the FamilySearch website are available either by looking in the catalog or by looking in the historical record collections. That's it. And where are the rest? Where are the 60% of the documents? Okay. So now we know. So now we find out that a few years ago, when a number of genealogists were, let's say, frequently requesting the FamilySearch liberate the vast number of records they had stored in their hard drives and let those records be looked at by the public. And the response was generally no, because nobody will know what they are and they won't know how to use them. And we say, we don't care. We know how to use them and they'll benefit us. So now they stuck them in and they called it images. And it's under the search category. And you go to the images and it will take you to this point. And what you're looking at, by the way, here is a counter that tells you, and you'll watch it as you watch it, as the number of records that are pouring into the FamilySearch website. So it's kind of a digital way of telling you that there's over almost 5 billion records in there. And you can guess that somewhere between half or more of those records are not anyplace else except in this images pile. So this is what the images pile looks like. You go in by in this case, Massachusetts, United States, and you find out that there are 75,835 results. And what are these? These are, each of these is essentially the equivalent of the shuttle, of the hard drive that was sent by the digitizing people for that period of work, whether it's a week or whatever time period that they were being, set up with. In some cases, it could be a daily process, but I think it would probably be more likely weekly. But in this case, each one of those sections is a different section. So here what you have are all the different places with the number of these records that are associated with each of those different locations in Massachusetts, and those are the counties. And so these are extra records. In other words, you haven't seen these records before. They're not in the catalog. They're not available when you do a name search. They may not be on Ancestry. They may not be anywhere except right here in this pile of records on FamilySearch. So the next part is here is this is how many there are. There's lots. And if you look down at the lower corner, you'll see that there's 200 pages like this one, and this is not the full page, it scrolls. So there's just a huge number of these sets. Each one has anywhere from a few images, 8 images, up to thousands images. And so when you click on those images, if I clicked on one of those sets of images, then I would have the original images. And yes, you need to search the images page by page. So there's no question that you've got to go through this page by page to see what you're getting here is a date and a place, and a very specific place. And if you know the place and the date where your ancestors' events occurred, then your task is simply going through this whole pile to see if those records are there. And then the end product of that is you find out that more records are being dumped in there all the time. And so you never know if new records are there this week or this day or today. So you're basically going to be going back to this regularly to see if there's additional records. And it probably need to keep pretty good records of what you've searched so you know which of these collections you have. And as they're indexed and cataloged, they'll disappear from this pile and they'll go into the other 2 piles. So those are the kind of the traffic that goes through on the website. And now there are more images in the books. So you have all the books in the family history website, in addition to books that I mentioned earlier about records that are being acquired from other libraries around the country and even other countries. So right now there are over 500,000 plus books. They are completely read by OCR. Every word and every document and every book is searchable. And you can go into the book section and search for your family names, or you can search for places, or you can search for events, or whatever you want to search for, because it's all there. 100% of the text is digitized, and so and readable. And also, for many of the books are available. However, newer books may be subject to copyright limitations. So, and my suggestion is, if this book is copyrighted and is not available, for example, through FamilySearch, because it says due to copyright restrictions cannot be viewed online, I would either have to go to the library to look at the actual book, but what I would always do first is to search online to see if someone else had the book. And a lot of the books that are copyrighted are available on the archive.org website that I mentioned a minute ago, the Internet Archive. And the reason why they're available is because they treat them as a library and let you check the books out for free. And it's all free, by the way. I forget to mention that the Internet Archive is entirely free. And you can go in there and look. And they have about 34 million books completely digitized and searchable. So you're going to find a lot of the stuff like this book you may find on the Internet Archive, and it is available and you can actually read it online. So, and in some cases you would be able to download it because there's lots of different time limits on copyrights, and FamilySearch has a tendency to err in the favor of keeping things protected for the maximum period rather than trying to figure out for each item whether or not it's actually copyrighted. Now there's a whole nother section with more records that you may not even have ever looked at, and that is genealogies, and it's also under the search tab. And on the genealogies website, you can search for names, you can places, villages, clans, all different kinds of keyword searches, and look for a specific tree. And in there are all these different kinds of records. There's community trees, and I'll talk a little bit about that. There are oral genealogies and computer-generated trees that have read the book. The records have been read and created these pedigrees. And then guilds of one-name studies. That's an organization in Europe and in England that specializes in looking and extracting all the people of one surname. So if you have surnames that happen to be in the Guild of One-Name Studies, all the records you need might already be in that organization. Partner trees from My Trees and Roots Finder and American Ancestors. Pedigree resource file are user submitted files. You can continually to submit files to FamilySearch for safekeeping, and you do that through a GEDCOM file to the pedigree resource file. And then there's the ancestral file, which is all of the records that were submitted by users over the years, beginning back in the 1800s. And so that's a vast file. And then there's the IGI, or International Genealogical Index, and those are extracted records where records have been extracted from primarily England and Mexico, but there's a few others thrown in there. All of these are on the genealogies website and searchable. If we go to the communities, there is one very valuable collection, and a lot of people would be interested in if they knew it were there, and that is all the royal families of Europe and oral histories. So if your people came from a place where, like in Africa, there are thousands of African and Tongan and other types of records in here in the oral histories, and they are searchable. And then the royal families concludes all the royal families of Europe with all the information that is known up to date about all of the families and how they're organized and who they are and where they are. So this is a way for you to go in and look. If you really want to see you're connected and you say somebody's this gives you all the information about the actual records that exist about the royal families. And another part of it is the community has the Mayflower Society pedigrees. And it has the data of the 30-volume Mayflower families through 5 generations, which are known as the Silver Books. And then they have the applications for membership in the General Society of Mayflower Descendants that were submitted from 1896 to 2019. All of those records are here on FamilySearch. And I plead with people, please go look at these records on Mayflower. If you think you have Mayflower information and you get on FamilySearch and you want to change the information that's on the Mayflower people, please look at these records, because these are the ones that are substantiated, sourced, completely substantiated by the Mayflower Society. And I'll tell you, there is no controversy and there are no new people to be added to those lists. The amount of time and effort that's been expended is absolutely incredible. Okay, well, so these are the main categories, and I just make a notion. The computer trees and the oral genealogies are considered to be reliable. The rest of the records are let the researcher be aware. Now, in the community trees, some of the sections have been exhaustively researched, like the Mayflower collections, but some of the community trees are not. They are simply user-generated research projects for a specific area. And once you find it, they're very helpful, but once you find the information in the community trees, you should go to the original records and sources and make sure that they're substantiated. The rest of these, I would say the pedigree resource file and the ancestral file are nothing but huge piles of old pedigrees and family group records. And they have over the years have proved to be all more than unreliable in a lot of cases. They're very helpful to get started, but once again, all of that needs to be totally substantiated. And let me just kind of emphasize that you will never run out of places to look for records. You can't look at the records as fast as FamilySearch is putting them in. And if you think that FamilySearch and the big websites are the only place to look for records, that's why I keep mentioning the Internet Archive, is because there are fabulously huge piles of records out there that are not classified as genealogical records and are tremendously valuable. So what you're looking at here is a work in progress. It is not a static set of records. They're being indexed, cataloged, acquired, added to the images collection every day, year in and year out, as all of these people. And no, they did not they slowed down slightly, but they did not stop during the pandemic. They continued to make images. So it was simply a process of some places closed down, but other records were available. And a lot more records have been added in just the last few years. And now they're adding millions of records every year, millions and millions of records every year. And so this is an ongoing project. And if you can't find it today, there's no saying that you couldn't be able to find the same record, a good record tomorrow. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Have any questions or anything we need to address? Sorry if I'm still recovering from a cold, so if I sound a little stuffed up, that's fine. Let's see. Look in the chat. Yep. Okay, there's kind of a testimonial about Get Involved. That's an app that is on, you can put on your phone, your smartphone. Anything else? If not.
Yeah, no, I don't see anything. Frank Klosterman said great program.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you all then.
Thank you, James. And thank you everybody for attending this webinar today. And we hope you'll join us for our next webinar, which will be on April 7th, the Family History Guide, Tips and Tricks. It will be a deeper dive into some of the main features of the site with Bob Taylor. And a recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at our email, which is fhl_webinars@byu.edu, or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.